Link's Awakening is not worth $60. I know that's probably going to get me some hate by opening up this way, but it's the honest truth. This game reeks of a budget title. No matter how much work went into it, it does not feel like a full-priced game. If it was $20 or $30, fine, but absolutely not $60. With all of that said, unlike many modern remakes of older classic games, Link's Awakening isn't some grand reimagining. It's a remake through and through with very little changed. The problem is, a truly faithful reproduction can cut both ways, even when it's done well. In the case of Link's Awakening, the classic Game Boy title is so carefully reconstructed, it shows off the fine crafting of the original. Yet the recreation is so precise, it also showcases how the game's overall design and formula hasn't aged all that well. This is first seen in aspect ratio, which is a technobabble word that just refers to how the Game Boy had a square screen and the Switch has a wide rectangle for a screen. The world layout was precisely tailored to fit onto a small square screen, which means every section of the game was only ever meant to be seen one tile or screen at a time. In this remake, there's a stark conflict with the meticulously recreated world and the wider screen through which you view the world. Things that were meant to remain out of your view and hidden on the next screen over can no longer be kept away from your eyes, as the Switch screen will just show off sections of the map because it's wide while the world was tailored to a square screen. This is a minor conflict that doesn't completely ruin the game, but it's certainly awkward to see the ocean bordering a dry desert, and they're only separated by a hard wall as if neighboring rooms inside of the same house. In the original, the hard wall between biomes was possible because you would only transition between certain tiles. This made it possible to get away with having a desert sitting on the coast of an island, but the smoke and mirrors are demystified with the wide screen. This problem is so pronounced that whenever you venture down into a dungeon, the game literally clips off the extra space on the sides of the screen. Some dungeon areas that were clearly meant as large rooms have been joined, and you wander around them freely using the whole screen. For the most part though, the edges of the screen are kept black, so you can't peek into adjacent rooms and see more than you're supposed to. This is a much more jarring design conflict than anything you see in the overworld, even though it's easier to overlook screen space that's just darkened out. Now, beyond the annoyances stemming from the game world and screen shape conflict, there's also something to be said about how the design of the overworld hasn't exactly aged well. When Link's Awakening was first released back in 1993, game design was in a very different place. Overall, how game worlds were created was strongly dictated by the limitations of what they ran on. Let's not forget that the Game Boy was the world's first truly successful handheld gaming console, and it only came about because of the glut of cheap calculator parts readily available to the market at the time. The point is, the Game Boy wasn't a very powerful machine, which led to the overall world in Link's Awakening being pretty small, especially when compared to today's standards. Now, because this remake is so faithfully recreated, the island of Koholint feels extremely restricted. There's no wasted space in the entire game, and overall you consistently weave back and forth across the same screen in a spaghetti-like fashion. It's extremely common for areas from early in the game to be reused later with just a few impassable rocks splitting the screen in two. This was a necessary design choice to squeeze every drop out of the limited storage space on a game cartridge back in the early 90s. Today though, it's just painfully obvious that the world was designed to look big, but in practice it's little more than a multitude of hallways that are carefully snaked around to create the illusion of scale. There are seldom wide open fields and places to legitimately free roam. What's more, several areas are specifically made to function as shortcuts. If you've ever played or seen someone play a Dark Souls game, it's a bit similar, like finding a gate that lets you bypass a section of the map, which isn't entirely bad. The problem is how these roadblocks box you in from a very early stage in the game. It's one story to find a shortcut that bypasses a sizable section of a level. It's another to have a small village surrounded by 3 or 4 roadblocks that box you in from the very start of the game. Keeping in mind, there's a lot of snaking back and forth to even get to several of those roadblocks at all. What's worse though, is how all of this back and forth means Link's Awakening commits one of the cardinal sins of game design: backtracking. and it's not just doing some of it. Because of the overall maze-like world design, you'll frequently have to loop all the way left just to get to a place one step to the right, meaning you're doing lots of backtracking. In fact, it's not unfair to say that Link's Awakening is probably the most egregious offender for backtracking in the Zelda franchise. Which is a shame, because with a remake, that could have been avoided. Now, looking past the issues that come from remaking a 26-year-old game that has outdated design goals, there are other problems with Link's Awakening. One thing of particular note are the dungeon puzzles, boss battles, and enemy weaknesses. It's not uncommon in modern games to be faced with a new foe and have a glowing weak spot that screams, "Hit me!" Or in more egregious situations, a game will literally stop and spell out in text how to kill an enemy. However, coming from a different era of game design, Link's Awakening does no such thing. If you need help finding your way, you have to consult with villagers for where you need to go next. In dungeons, you first have to find a stone beak and then stick it in owl statues so you can consult them for hints and tips on puzzles and enemies. In fact, the only thing that's spelled out for you throughout the entire game is the general direction, and a highlight on the map, of where the next dungeon is. This is actually the closest the game comes to hand-holding, and while it can prevent you from wandering aimlessly, listening to a windbag owl re-inform you of what your big goal is every single time you clear a dungeon gets pretty annoying. In this manner, Link's Awakening manages to hold your hand in an annoying but not totally helpful way when outside of the temples, but drops you like a rock and makes you search for help once you get inside of one. By far, the most significant way this is done is with enemy weaknesses. For instance, there are a handful of enemies who react to normal sword attacks like they take damage, but in reality, they're not taking any damage and instead have to either be charged at or hit with a powered-up sword spin attack. These are things never once explained or alluded to with hints of any type. The worst part about all of this is how you learn some of these things during boss fights through trial and error. At least, as long as you have the patience to do it the hard way and don't go searching on the internet for a guide to learn something critical that the game never even attempts to try and explain to you. Honestly, this is one of the cheapest holdovers from the original game. Never in the entire Zelda franchise has a sword spin attack dealt a different type of damage. At best, it's only ever dealt more damage. This makes the moment when you figure out that only a sword spin attack will harm a specific enemy far from rewarding, and much more frustrating or infuriating. Meanwhile, dungeon puzzles don't pose too much of a challenge, at least right up until you hit one or two that stop you dead in your tracks, most often because Link's Awakening just decides to stop being intuitive, or when it relies on a mechanic that other Zelda games never really bothered with. By far, one of the most standout features of the original Link's Awakening that's fully carried over to this remake is the ability to use multiple items at once. Equip both arrows and bombs on separate buttons, and you can fire bomb arrows by pressing both at the same time. This is a feature that no other Zelda game really ever gave you the ability to do, though it was half-heartedly implemented as a single-button action in later games. It's a nice thing to work with. However, it's not implemented as a centric mechanic, and there are very limited ways to combine the items you get out of each dungeon. Thus, the need to use two items at once is uncommon, and more often than not serves as a way to think outside of the box to get some of the more difficult-to-reach collectibles. More importantly though, you're never explicitly taught about simultaneous button use. It's not even in the tip library, a literal library at the start of the game that serves as a beginner's tips area to help you get acquainted with some of the game's mechanics. However, it's never required you check the library out either, so short of you feeling like exploring, it's easy to miss out on some of the helpful pointers. Still though, using two items at the same time is never explained to you, which is a fairly big red mark, especially since things like dashing and jumping at the same time are necessary to complete many dungeons, but you're just left to figure out that you can do it all on your own without a shred of help. Link's Awakening is an alright game. It's functional, but it feels like an old game with updated visuals. It's pretty to look at, but exploring Koholint Island comes across as more of a chore with all the backtracking. Meanwhile, dungeons are short and all but one are a single floor, but they also employ backtracking to stretch out the limited content size of the levels. And all of this is compounded with how the game constrains your exploration from the outset to again make it feel bigger and longer than it really is. It's not that anything here is broken, in fact, it all works exactly like it's supposed to. But that's the problem. Not much of the original Link's Awakening has aged well, which means a truly faithful remake with few changes feels more like a chore to play through than it is fun. To say nothing of when the game makes a sudden right turn without warning you and you end up stuck. Ultimately, a game with new visuals that plays like it's 25 years old, flaws and all, is not worth a $60 price tag. If it was $20 or $30, fine, but absolutely not $60. Okay, now that I've said my piece, feel free to snap down to those comments and let me know I am wrong. I'm sure plenty of you feel that way. I mean, after all, I am criticizing a remake of a 25-year-old classic Zelda game. There's no way I haven't angered some of the internet by doing that. If you thought what I did was worth it, though, feel free to subscribe, check me out on Twitch, or maybe even contribute to me on Patreon. Until next time, though, I'm William Strife, and I'll catch you later.